A 90-year-old retired physicist catched a thief on camera. She didn't scream. She didn't confront them. She used logic. She quietly teamed up with her neighbors, set a brilliant trap, and got the culprit sacked. Case closed. Or so she thought. 10 days later, that same thief used the emergency key, the one meant to keep her safe, to unlock her front door in the dead of night. By morning, Myra Thompson was dead, smothered with her own pillow and beaten with a metal flask in the bed she'd slept in for decades. She was 5'3", under 7 stone, living with Parkinson's disease. The very evidence that caught her killer was completely powerless to save her life. This is the tragic story of Myra Thompson. This wasn't a story that started with violence. It started with a life, a long one, a good one. Myra Thompson was a retired physicist, a woman born in an era when it was rare for women to work in science at all, who built a career at Clatterbridge Hospital on the Wirral in Merseyside, England. Clatterbridge is known for its work in oncology, cancer treatment, and research. Somewhere in Myra's working life, she was part of something that helped people. She married. She built a home with her husband on a quiet residential street called Bold Way, in a town called Spittal, on the Wirral Peninsula. When her husband passed away, Myra stayed in that house, the one they'd built a life in together. By 2024, Myra was 90 years old, Parkinson's disease, leg ulcers, a Zimmer frame to get around. Physically, she was frail, 5'3", under 7 stone, a woman the courts would later describe, in the coldest legal language, as defenseless. But almost everyone who knew her said the same thing about who she actually was. Independent, alert, sharp. A woman who, despite everything her body was going through, still knew her own mind, still ran her own home, still noticed when something was wrong. That sharpness is what set everything in motion. Myra needed help. At 90, with Parkinson's, with mobility problems, of course she did. A team of carers came to her home. Different people, on rotation, helping with the basics. Meals, medication, getting dressed, getting up. This is normal life for elderly people across the UK. Millions of families rely on exactly this kind of care. You trust an agency. The agency sends people. Those people come into your parents', your grandparents', your aunt's home, and you trust them. There's no other way it works. One of the carers on Myra's rotation was a woman named Jane Hill, 52 years old, from Upton, also on the Wirral, not far from Myra's home in Spittal. 2 daughters, for granddaughters, a partner, on paper, an ordinary woman, doing an ordinary, important job. But something had started happening in Myra Thompson's home. Money was going missing. Myra kept cash in her handbag, which she kept in her bedroom, and the amounts weren't adding up. If you're 90, with Parkinson's, and you say money is going missing, some people assume it's confusion, forgetfulness. She probably miscounted. But Myra wasn't confused. She was right. This is where Myra's own sharpness becomes the most important detail in the case. She didn't just suspect something was wrong. She acted on it. With the help of her neighbors, people who clearly cared about her, Myra had a hidden camera installed at her bedroom, where her handbag was kept. The camera could be turned on remotely when carers arrived for visits, and switched off again when they left. A 90-year-old woman with Parkinson's, quietly working with neighbors she trusted, to catch whoever was stealing from her, without confronting anyone, without accusing anyone out loud, without putting herself at risk. She protected herself the smartest way she knew how, and it worked. On the 12th of April, 2024, Jane Hill visited Myra's home as part of her normal care rota. The camera was running. The footage showed exactly what Myra suspected. Jane Hill, caught on camera, taking money from Myra's handbag, £60. The neighbor who'd helped set up the camera reviewed the footage and reported it to the care agency. The agency investigated, which resulted to Jane Hill's suspension from her job. This is the point where a theft case should have ended as a theft case. Jane Hill had been caught, on camera, stealing from a vulnerable elderly woman in her care. That should have been the end of her involvement with Myra Thompson's life. A disciplinary process. Possibly a police report. Possibly a court date for a 60-pound theft charge. Embarrassing. Career-ending, probably, but survivable. Instead, Jane Hill told no one in her own life what had happened. She didn't tell her partner she'd lost her job. She pretended to still go to work every day, getting up, getting dressed, leaving the house, as if nothing had changed. For 10 days, Jane Hill lived a double life inside her own home, hiding that she'd been caught, hiding that she'd been suspended, hiding that the job giving her access to vulnerable people's homes was almost certainly over. On the night of the 22nd of April, 2024, 10 days after she was caught on camera, Jane Hill went back to Myra Thompson's house. Late at night, she let herself in, using a key from a key safe outside the property, one of those small lockboxes that hold a spare key, common for elderly or vulnerable people so carers can access the home even when the resident can't get to the door. A key safe that existed for exactly one reason: to keep Myra safe. Jane Hill used it to get inside, late at night, alone, unannounced. What Hill told police, eventually, was that she'd gone there to apologize, to return the money, to try to save her job. She said she chose to go late at night specifically so the neighbors wouldn't see her. The same neighbors who had helped install the camera that caught her in the first place. She wasn't avoiding being seen by Myra. She was avoiding being seen by the people protecting Myra. According to what Hill later told detectives, when she let herself into the house with the key-safe key, Myra, 90 years old, alone, hearing someone enter, started shouting. A 90-year-old woman, alone in bed, hears someone let themselves into her house in the middle of the night. Of course she shouted. Jane Hill's response to that shouting is the moment this story becomes almost impossible to comprehend. She hit Myra Thompson over the head with a metal flask, and when Myra continued to make noise, Jane Hill smothered her with a pillow. In her bed, in the home she'd lived in for decades, the home she'd shared with her late husband, the home where, just 10 days earlier, she'd quietly outsmarted a thief. The next morning, the 23rd of April, another carer arrived for the scheduled visit. This was the routine. Carers came and went throughout the day, checking that Myra was all right. This time, Myra didn't answer. The carer went in, found her lying in bed, cold, unresponsive, blood on her pillow, blood on a metal flask beside her bed. The carer did exactly what she was trained to do. Called her manager, called an ambulance. It was already too late. Emergency services arrived at the house on Bold Way at around 11:20 that morning. Myra Thompson, 90 years old, retired physicist, widow, the woman who had quietly outsmarted the person stealing from her, was gone. The cause of death was given as mechanical asphyxiation. She had been suffocated. Merseyside police launched a murder investigation immediately. And here's what matters most for anyone watching this who has an elderly parent, grandparent, or relative in care. This investigation didn't take years. It didn't go cold. It didn't end as an open loop with no answers. Because of that hidden camera, because of those neighbors, because Myra had already, quietly, built a trail of evidence before she even knew her life was in danger. Investigators had somewhere to start immediately. Doorbell footage from Hill's own street showed her leaving home at around 8 p.m. on the night of the murder, still in her work uniform, despite having been suspended 10 days earlier. Phone data tracked her movements to Myra's house that night. The pieces came together fast. Jane Hill was arrested. When first questioned, she denied any involvement. By her third police interview, the story changed. She admitted going to the house, admitted the confrontation, admitted hitting Myra with the flask, admitted smothering her. She framed it as something that spiraled, an apology visit that went wrong. The prosecution saw it differently. Jane Hill appeared at Liverpool Magistrates' Court charged with murder and with the theft of £60 10 days before the killing. Witnesses described her as visibly shaken, trembling, dyed red hair tied back in a ponytail, speaking only to confirm her name and date of birth. The case moved to Liverpool Crown Court. In July 2024, Jane Hill pleaded guilty. guilty to murder, guilty to the theft, guilty, the court also heard, to taking jewelry from other clients as well. Not an isolated lapse, a pattern, a carer trusted with access to multiple vulnerable people's homes, who had been taking from more than one of them. In October 2024, Jane Hill was sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court. The judge described the attack as a planned assault on a defenseless, vulnerable woman in her own home. Hill was jailed for life, with a minimum term of 22.5 years. Detective Inspector Dave Jones, who led the investigation, called it the ultimate breach of trust from someone Myra trusted, and said it was shocking that Hill chose to attack a frail and elderly woman who should have been safe in bed in her own home. He added that Hill had shown no remorse for Myra's death. Myra's niece and Charters spoke for the family after sentencing. She said abusing a position of trust against someone as frail and vulnerable as her aunt, and then confronting her with such violence, had been incredibly upsetting for the family to come to terms with. She said they could only imagine the terror Myra experienced in her final moments, in her own home, a place where she was supposed to be safe. So why does this case matter among stories of young women, viral videos, international intrigue? Because this case is different. This is not a case with an open loop. No unanswered question about who did it. No missing suspect. No unresolved theory. Jane Hill is in prison. She pleaded guilty. She'll serve at least 22.5 years. Legally, this case is closed, but the questions it raises aren't. First, Myra did everything right. She noticed something was wrong. She didn't panic, didn't accuse anyone outright. She quietly worked with people she trusted to get proof. The proof worked. It caught the thief, but it didn't protect her. Being right, having evidence, doing everything a careful person is supposed to do, still wasn't enough to save her life. What does that mean for every other elderly person relying on a care system that depends, fundamentally, on trusting strangers in their homes? Second, Jane Hill, 52 years old, 2 daughters, 4 granddaughters, a partner she lied to for 10 days, a woman with her own family, her own home, her own life, who, when caught doing something wrong, didn't face the consequences. She hid them. And in hiding them, she made a choice that ended someone else's life and destroyed her own. What was happening in those 10 days? What was going through her mind getting dressed every morning for a job she no longer had? We'll likely never know. Third, and this is the one I think about most, the court heard Hill had taken jewelry from other clients too. Other vulnerable people, other homes, people who, as far as we know, never had a hidden camera, never had proof. What happened to them? Did they ever get their belongings back? Did they even know? If you have an elderly relative in care, someone you love, who depends on people coming into their home, this case isn't meant to frighten you for the sake of it. But it's a reminder. Pay attention. Ask questions. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Myra Thompson did, and because of her sharpness, her quiet courage, her decision to protect herself even at 90, this case didn't stay open for years. A dangerous person was stopped. If this story moved you, comment below. Subscribe for more real cases that deserve to be told properly. Justice doesn't always take decades. Sometimes it takes a 90-year-old woman with a hidden camera and the courage to use it.